There's something deeply unsettling about a person who seems put together. The act of seeming put together is itself a kind of disorder, a rehearsed one, a disorder that learned how to dress well, speak calmly, and explain itself with enough conviction that even the person performing it stopped questioning whether any of it was real. You've probably done this. Maybe you're doing it right now, in that automatic way where the performance and the performer have become so fused together that you genuinely can't tell where one ends and the other begins. You've organized the noise inside your head into something that functions, something that gets through the day, something that from the outside could pass for a person who has it together. That's not a stable mind, that's a managed one. And those two things are not the same. They don't feel the same, they don't produce the same decisions, and they don't lead to the same life. A managed mind is always working, always compensating, always one unexpected event away from revealing how much effort it takes just to hold the whole thing in place. A stable mind doesn't work to maintain anything. It doesn't perform equanimity. It operates from it. The distinction sounds philosophical. It is. But it's also brutally practical, because the way your mind is organized, or rather the way it isn't, determines everything. It determines why the same patterns keep surfacing regardless of how much your external circumstances change. Why the same weight follows you into every new version of your life, wearing different clothes. Why your ambitions feel real until the moment they require something from the deeper parts of you, and then, without warning, they don't. The chaos isn't random. It has a logic, it has a shape. And once you see that shape, you can't unsee it. Plato wasn't a self-help writer. He wasn't trying to make anyone feel better about themselves. What he was doing, across decades of philosophy, through dialogues that most people dismiss as ancient theory, was pointing at something the modern world has done everything it can to avoid looking at directly. The human mind, left unexamined, doesn't tend toward order. It tends toward the illusion of order. What follows isn't a guide, it's not a plan, it's an examination, in the oldest and most serious sense of that word. 8 angles on the way your mind actually operates that the comfortable version of self-awareness was never designed to reach. If you've spent real time thinking about who you are and still feel like the thinking keeps circling the same ground without going deeper, that feeling is the most honest thing about you right now. The ability to talk about yourself fluently is not evidence of self-knowledge, it's evidence of practice. And the more practiced you become at describing yourself, at producing a coherent account of who you are, why you behave the way you do, what you want and what you don't, the more that fluency starts functioning as a wall rather than a window. Because the moment you can explain yourself, you stop examining yourself. Explanation and examination are not the same movement. They run in opposite directions. Plato drew a line between two kinds of knowing that most people never think to distinguish: doxa, opinion, and episteme, genuine knowledge. The difference isn't about how much you know, it's about how that knowing was produced. Doxa is formed through exposure, through repetition, through what feels self-evident. Episteme is formed through interrogation, through subjecting a belief to pressure until you find out whether it holds or collapses. And the uncomfortable reality is that almost everything a person believes about themselves belongs to the first category, not the second. You have a self-concept, a fairly detailed one. You know your tendencies, your patterns, your defaults under pressure. You know what kind of person you are in conflict, in intimacy, in failure. You can describe your own psychology with a vocabulary that sounds precise, but precision in description is not the same as accuracy in knowledge. A person can describe their own cage in extraordinary detail and still have no idea how they got into it. Here's what's actually happening when you introspect. You're consulting a record, a running document that's been edited continuously since you were old enough to have an inner life. Not by you exactly, but by the accumulated pressure of every conclusion you were nudged toward before you were equipped to resist it. That record feels like truth. It reads like truth. It has internal consistency, which is the thing the mind mistakes most reliably for truth. But internal consistency only means the story doesn't contradict itself. It says nothing about whether the story is real. What you call your identity is, in large part, a sediment, layer over layer of reaction, adaptation, and adjustment, none of it chosen with the kind of deliberate authorship you'd like to believe was involved. The mind doesn't build a self the way an architect builds a structure, with a plan and intention behind every decision. It accumulates, it deposits, it adds each new layer on top of whatever was already there, without ever going back to question whether the ground beneath it was solid. And over time, the accumulation becomes so dense, so familiar, so thoroughly fused with the experience of being you, that the layers stop being visible as layers. They become what you call your character, your nature, the fixed thing that you are. That's the function of doxa in the psychology of identity. It doesn't feel like opinion, it feels like bedrock. And that feeling, that particular solidity, is precisely what makes it so resistant to examination. You don't interrogate bedrock, you build on it. And so you build, and the building gets more elaborate, and the foundation underneath it never gets touched. And somewhere in the accumulation of all that construction, you lose the ability to distinguish between what you actually are and what you simply became. And the question that opens up underneath all of this, the one that doesn't have a comfortable answer, is what it would mean to actually know yourself, rather than simply having a long, detailed, well-rehearsed opinion about who you are. Because those are different projects entirely, and they don't lead to the same place. The observer doesn't explain the human mind, it exposes it. If that's the kind of examination you've been looking for, subscribe and don't miss what comes next. Before ambition, before conviction, before the values you'd list if someone asked what drives you, there is something older, something that predates your reasoning, your principles, your carefully maintained self-image. Plato called it thymos, not desire in the ordinary sense, not hunger, not pleasure-seeking, not the drive toward comfort or safety. Thymos is the part of the psyche that needs to matter, that needs its existence acknowledged. That experience is being overlooked, not as disappointment, but as something closer to violence, a specific, burning kind of internal injury that the person carrying it will go to extraordinary lengths to avoid feeling again. The word gets translated as spiritedness in most philosophical texts, which flattens it almost beyond recognition. Spiritedness sounds like enthusiasm. What Plato was describing is something far more precise and far more dangerous. The deep human need for recognition. Not love, not belonging, but recognition. The acknowledgement that you are real, that you are significant, that your presence registers in the world in a way that cannot be casually dismissed. That need is woven into the architecture of human psychology at a level that precedes rational thought entirely. And here is where it becomes worth paying close attention to. Thymos doesn't stay in its lane. When it goes unexamined, when a person has no real awareness of how much of their energy is organized around the need to be seen, validated, taken seriously, it migrates, it infiltrates, it attaches itself to ambition and looks like drive. It attaches itself to argument and looks like principle. It attaches itself to generosity and looks like care. The behavior on the surface can be genuine. The fuel underneath it is something else, and the person performing the behavior is usually the last one to see the difference. Think about the last time you felt genuinely, disproportionately irritated by being ignored. Not hurt, irritated. The specific heat of it, the way it kept its temperature longer than the situation deserved. The way some part of you returned to it again and again, not to understand it, but to circle it, to turn it over, to locate the precise moment where your presence failed to land the way it should have. That reaction wasn't about the specific situation, it was thymos making itself known. And the intensity of that reaction, the degree to which it exceeded what the situation logically warranted, is a fairly accurate measure of how much of your inner life is organized around a need you've never directly confronted. What makes this particularly difficult to see in yourself is that the behaviors thymos produces are often indistinguishable from admirable ones. The person who works relentlessly, is that discipline, or is that the need to produce something the world cannot ignore? The person who argues their position with unusual force, is that intellectual integrity, or is that the need to have their perspective acknowledged as valid? The person who gives generously, publicly, visibly, is that genuine altruism, or is that the construction of a self that cannot be dismissed? In individual cases, these questions don't have clean answers. But the fact that the questions exist, that the line between authentic motivation and thymic need is this blurry, should tell you something about how thoroughly this force has woven itself into the fabric of ordinary life. The damage isn't in the need itself. The damage is in its invisibility. A force you can't see is a force you can't account for. And a force you can't account for will continue making decisions on your behalf, decisions that look like yours, that carry your name, that you'll defend as your own, while the actual author of those decisions remains somewhere you've never thought to look. What runs beneath your decisions is not always what you believe it to be. And the degree to which you've never seriously interrogated that, the degree to which you've accepted your stated motivations at face value, is the degree to which this force has had uncontested authority over your life. There is a particular kind of realization that occurs when you look at your life and find it occupied by a stranger. You've spent a lifetime cultivating what you believe is a unique personality, a set of tastes and convictions that distinguish you from the noise of the crowd. Yet, if you were to strip away everything you adopted, simply because you saw it valued in someone else, there might be nothing left but an uncomfortable, hollow silence. This is the mechanism of mimesis, the deep-seated human instinct to imitate not just the actions of others, but their very wanting. You don't desire things in a vacuum. You desire them because you see them being desired. You've outsourced your definition of a meaningful life to 1,000 different models, and you've done it so gradually that the transition from them to me became invisible. This hijacking of the self doesn't happen through a single act of surrender. It is a slow, molecular replacement. You start by adopting a turn of phrase, a certain aesthetic, a specific way of performing competence. You do it to bridge the distance between who you are and who you think you need to appear to be. But the performance eventually consumes the performer. The mask doesn't just sit on your face, it grafts itself to the skin. By the time you reach adulthood, you are a composite sketch of every person you ever admired, feared, or envied. Your originality is merely a peculiar arrangement of borrowed parts. You aren't living a life. You are a curator of a museum dedicated to the influence of others. The danger of this borrowed existence is that it leaves you fundamentally unanchored. When your desires are echoes, your satisfaction will always be a hallucination. You achieve the goal, you acquire the status, you master the persona, and the expected resonance never arrives. It can't. You've reached a destination that someone else mapped out, for a prize you only wanted because you saw them holding it. This constant underlying frustration is the price of a hijacked identity, It's the feeling of a body rejecting a transplanted organ. You are trying to live inside a version of yourself that was never meant to house your actual spirit. And the more you double down on the performance, the more distant that spirit becomes, until it is nothing more than a faint, incoherent pulse beneath a mountain of sophisticated imitation. This fragmentation isn't just a loss of self, it's an internal friction. When you have no central principle of your own, every borrowed impulse and every mirrored appetite starts demanding the right to lead. You become a democracy of competing voices, each one convinced it has a legitimate claim to your life, with no one left at the center to decide which one actually matters. The modern world has sold you a lie about freedom. You've been taught that liberty is the ability to satisfy every impulse as it arises, that a life well lived is one where you have the resources to say yes to whatever voice happens to be shouting loudest inside you at any given moment. You believe that having many options makes you powerful. In reality, it has made you a servant to a psychic democracy where no one is in charge. Plato described this state as the democratic soul, and he didn't mean it as a compliment. He was describing a person who has lost the ability to prioritize, a person where the desire for profound growth carries the same weight as the desire for trivial distraction. When every appetite has an equal vote, your life becomes a series of accidents, not a coherent path. You live in a state of internal anarchy that you mistake for being open-minded or exploring your interests. Because you refuse to establish a hierarchy of values, a principle that dictates what stays and what must be sacrificed, you are constantly pulled in a dozen directions at once. Without a governing principle, the loudest, most immediate appetites will always win. The part of you that aims for long-term mastery is consistently outvoted by the part that seeks immediate comfort, simply because the latter is more insistent in the present moment. The result of this internal equality is a profound lack of character. Character is not a collection of traits. It is a hierarchy. It is the result of certain parts of the psyche being placed firmly in command of others. When you refuse to do this, when you insist that all your needs and wants are equally valid, you become a leaf in the wind. You become predictable to everyone except yourself. You wonder why you feel stagnant despite being active, but the answer is visible to anyone watching. You are moving in circles because you have no center. When the internal democracy of the mind becomes too chaotic to bear, it doesn't seek balance. It seeks a dictator. This is the transition from the democratic soul to what Plato called the tyrannical soul. Most people mistake this shift for a moment of sudden clarity or finding their passion. You see someone, perhaps yourself, suddenly consumed by a single goal, a single person, or a single ambition. The previous indecision vanishes, replaced by a terrifyingly narrow focus. This isn't the birth of purpose, it is a coup d'etat. One specific appetite has grown so large and so aggressive that it has dismantled the rest of your psyche to feed itself. You aren't being driven by a conviction, you are being governed by a monopoly. A tyrannical mind is remarkably efficient, which is why it's so easy to romanticize. The internal friction is gone because there is no longer anyone left to argue. The parts of you that valued rest or intellectual integrity or human connection have been silenced or repurposed to serve the new master. If your passion requires you to lie, you lie. If it requires you to ignore your own nature, you ignore it. You call this commitment or grind, but from the outside it looks like a haunting. You have become an instrument for a single drive that has no off switch and no capacity for mercy. It's a state where the hierarchy isn't built on wisdom, but on the sheer strength of a dominant impulse that happened to be the most ruthless. You aren't a unified being just because you are focused. True unity requires a principle that can account for the whole of a person, not just the part that wants to win or the part that wants to be adored. When one appetite overthrows the rest, it doesn't just govern your actions, it begins to distort your perception of reality itself. You start seeing the world not as it is, but as a collection of resources or obstacles for that one drive. And once that distortion takes hold, the thing you use to navigate your life becomes the very thing that ensures you'll stay lost. There is a subtle, circular trap in the way you attempt to fix your own internal disorder. When the friction of a managed mind becomes too loud, your instinct is to reach for a solution, a practice, a philosophy, a digital refuge, or a habit that promises to dial down the volume. You treat these things as external interventions, as a pharmakon. In ancient Greek, this word is famously double-edged. It means both the cure and the poison. The tragedy of the modern mind is that it almost always reaches for an answer that is, in its very DNA, the same substance as the problem. You are trying to put out a fire by rearranging the burning wood. Think about how you handle the feeling of being overwhelmed. You seek out information to feel more in control, yet it is the sheer volume of unintegrated information that created the sense of being overwhelmed in the first place. You seek out productivity to escape the weight of your obligations, yet the logic of productivity is the very thing that convinces you that your worth is tied to an infinite output. This isn't an escape, it's a reinforcement. Every time you use a distraction to clear your head, you are actually training your brain to be incapable of inhabiting its own silence. You are strengthening the muscle of avoidance while wondering why the things you are avoiding feel increasingly heavy. This paradox is why most attempts at self-improvement fail to produce a different kind of person. They only produce a more efficient version of the same disordered person. You adopt a new routine or a new set of rules, but you apply them with the same anxious, grasping energy that made your life feel chaotic to begin with. The solution becomes just another appetite for the internal democracy to argue over. It becomes another tool for the tyrannical impulse to use against the rest of your psyche. You aren't changing the chemistry of your mind, you are just changing the brand of the sedative. The pharmakon works because it offers immediate relief, and that relief is the bait. It makes the managed chaos feel tolerable for another day, which is exactly what prevents you from doing the more difficult work of dismantling the chaos entirely. By treating the symptoms of your fragmented identity with tools designed to suppress them, you ensure that the underlying cause remains untouched. This exhaustion is the signal you've been ignoring. It's the indication that the answer isn't something you need to acquire, but something you've spent a lifetime trying to forget. The noise isn't an external problem to be solved, it's a screen. And behind that screen lies a type of knowing that doesn't require a new vocabulary or a new set of tools. It only requires the courage to stop reaching for the poison you've mistaken for a cure. The most effective way to avoid a confrontation with yourself is to turn your existence into a perpetual investigation. You move through your days as if the truth of your character is a secret hidden in a future you haven't reached yet, or buried in a perspective you haven't yet acquired. This creates a comfortable distance between who you are and what you know. But if you look closely at the moments when you feel most unsettled, you'll find that the problem isn't a lack of information. It is a refusal to acknowledge the information you already possess. Plato's concept of anamnesis suggests that the most vital truths are not discovered. They are recovered. They are the things you've spent a lifetime learning how to ignore. Think about the specific recurring frictions in your life, the way you sabotage your own progress, or the way you feel a certain hollowness even when things are going exactly as planned. These aren't mysteries. If you were being honest, You could trace the lineage of these patterns back to their source in seconds. You know exactly which parts of your personality are a performance designed to keep others at a distance, and you know which of your convictions are just convenient justifications for your fears. The search for self-knowledge is often just a sophisticated way of stalling. As long as you are looking for the answer, you aren't responsible for the fact that you already have it. This internal suppression requires a massive amount of psychological energy. You have built a complex architecture of distractions to ensure that the noise of your daily life stays loud enough to drown out the signals from your own nature. Realizing this is not a moment of sudden enlightenment, it is a moment of cold, heavy recognition. It is the realization that the person you've been waiting to become is already there, currently being suffocated by the version of yourself you find easier to manage. You don't need a new theory to fix your life. You need the courage to stop pretending that you don't know what's wrong with it. The resistance you feel when you stop searching and start looking is the most honest thing about you. That tension is the feeling of the mask resisting the face underneath. Most people flee from that tension because it threatens the stability of their managed chaos. They would rather spend another decade searching for a truth that feels good than spend 5 minutes acknowledging a truth that requires them to change. But if you sit with that weight, the layers of practiced opinion begin to dissolve, and you are left with the one thing you can't argue with, the reality of what you have allowed yourself to become. Repetition is the default state of the human mind. You may change your career, your geography, or your social circle, but you will find that the core friction of your existence remains constant. This is not a matter of fate, it is a matter of mechanics. A mind that has not been rigorously examined functions as a closed loop of pre-programmed responses. You aren't making new choices, you are merely applying the same internal architecture to different sets of data. Without a deliberate intervention of awareness, you are biologically and psychologically incapable of producing a different result. You are not experiencing a new life, you are experiencing the same life in a different room. The weight of an unexamined life is cumulative and reinforcing. Every time you repeat a pattern, you strengthen the neurological and psychological grooves that make that pattern feel like your nature. You eventually stop seeing these behaviors as choices and start seeing them as destiny. You tell yourself, this is just who I am, failing to recognize that who you are is currently just a collection of unprobed habits. Examination is the only thing that interrupts this momentum. It is a cold clinical process of observing the machine while it is running. It isn't about self-improvement, it is about the raw data of self-recognition. If you don't dedicate the energy to dismantle the managed chaos of your internal world, you will spend the rest of your life defending it. You will continue to choose the same types of avoidance and the same hollow victories because they are the only things your current structure allows. The tragedy of the unexamined life is that it is fundamentally static. Most people die as more sophisticated versions of the same disordered individuals they were at 20. They never change. They only accumulate more excuses for why they stayed the same. It's sobering to realize how much of what we call personality is actually just a set of defense mechanisms we never outgrew. I've seen so many people burn through their lives trying to change their external reality, thinking that a new job or a new partner will finally provide the peace they're missing. It never works. The friction follows you because the friction is you. The hardest thing a person can do is admit that they are the common denominator in all their own problems. It's a bitter pill, but it's the only one that actually stops the cycle. The chaos you've been managing won't resolve itself through more management. Time doesn't produce order, only observation does. You can continue to polish the mask, or you can begin the uncomfortable process of looking behind it. The patterns we've discussed aren't theories. They are the active forces dictating your reality at this very moment. What would happen if you stopped defending your behavior and started examining it? What if you treated your certainties about yourself as the mere opinions they actually are? If this exposure resonates with the part of you that is exhausted by the performance, do not let this be more unintegrated noise. Apply the lens. Look at the friction. Ask yourself what you are currently pretending not to know. The only way to stop repeating the same life is to finally see the one who is choosing it. If you seek to continue this examination of the patterns that define us, subscribe to The Observer. We don't offer motivation, and we don't offer comfort. We offer the cold lucidity of the unmasked mind. Turn on notifications so you don't miss the next exposure.